I'm Nick Hernandez, and you're listening to the Positivity Matters podcast. We speak with well being scholars and leaders from a variety of fields. Today, I have Professor Chan Hellman, professor at the University of Oklahoma and director of the Hope Research Center, as my guest. Chan, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Nick.
This is very exciting because your co-author connects with Lincoln, Nebraska, and it was the year of hope at one of the houses of worship in Lincoln, and there is a hope house that is going to emerge as part of this. So
Hmm.
and there are I can't tell you how many great organizations there are around town that have hope in the name.
Yeah.
So there's a pastor that did his doctoral research on hope, and his he integrated like the theological hope, and he calls that ultimate hope with the sciency hope, and he calls that practical hope, and how those things come together in a congregation to result in hope sharing, and it is extremely fascinating philosophically. One of the grad students at the philosophy department here recently did his dissertation on hope. So the theological, the philosophical, the empirical. So, what is hope and how did you come to find it, the thing itself and the research thereof?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So that's a great question. Um, so at the University of Oklahoma, when I came to the university right out of grad school, I began partnering with community-based organizations to measure outcomes and impact of program services. So a lot of mostly nonprofit human service type organizations, domestic violence, child maltreatment, homelessness, etc. And then I literally stumbled onto Rick Snyder's Hope one day, Rainbows of the Mind, and read. I got through probably the second page, and I had to set it down because what I realized was that the language of hope for me was the single best description of the work that's taking place in our communities. Um, and so for us at the Hope Research Center, we study hope in the context of trauma and adversity. So very interested in how trauma and adversity can rob us of hope, and then how program services or intentional strategies can nurture and restore that hope. Um, so greatly influenced by obviously by Professor Snyder and his work, Shane Lopez, and then some of their colleagues and students. So
And did you ever get to meet Rick?
I never did. No, I stumbled onto his work after his passing.
Hmm. Have aside from his the research itself, have you heard stories of him as a person in sort of a sharing hope with other people by chance?
Well, I think one of the things that stood out for me that I thought was really gutsy, and I can't remember. I think it was a national news show, maybe like Good Morning America or the Today Show, where he actually predicted in sort of the pain tolerance, where he measured hope uh, of the cast and then predicted who would hold their hand into the icy bucket of water the longest, where their hope scores actually predicted the order of which they remove their hand. And I remember reading that or hearing about that, and I just thought that's pretty gutsy to do that live on national television, because as with any science, it could have failed, and the fact that it didn't was kind of impressive to me. So uh, that story just stands out for me as um, you're putting it all on the line right there.
Beautiful, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
I've met people who were at the point of giving up at the thought of completing their doctoral work, and he s- sat with them and shared hope, and they
Mm,
continued on and are deeply appreciative,
yeah,
totally
it's
unrelated
beautiful.
to anything in the classroom. So I've heard some personal stories, and I think I may have heard that one that you shared, but thank you for the reminder. So I don't know what his own personal story was, but like the way that you found yourself into the hope research in your book, Hope Rising, you shared a little bit about coming
Hmm.
at it from that place of getting processing trauma personally and moving
Hmm.
into this very like constructive generative side of life. Like what was that journey
Yeah,
like?
sure.
Tell
Yeah.
me the story.
So, yeah. So, um, growing up, a lot of adversity. I was a homeless youth from late middle school throughout high school, and just all the adversity that goes along with that. Um, and so all of those experiences greatly influence the research that we do. I'm really interested in how adversity and trauma influence hope. And I think about knowing full well that when children, adults, and families will engage in program services, outcomes tend to be better. And so for me, the question is why don't they engage in those programs that are available? And for me, the answer is hope, right? And kind of in that context of trauma. So for me, it was a lot of those personal experiences of adversity, and really just asking myself as I got older, why am I still alive? And what afforded me the opportunity, for instance, to be a full professor at the University of Oklahoma. And um, the more I learned about hope, the more I realized that what Professor Snyder gave us was the answer. And, that I had some really significant adults in my life who kind of leaned in when I needed that guidance and that assurance. So yeah, so for me, it's hope is very personal as well as as an academic.
Hmm. Would you be willing to share the story of one of the difference makers?
Sure, yeah, yeah, yeah. Mr. Berg. In fact, I communicated with him yesterday. Um, so in the eighth grade, as I had kind of transitioned into, and by the way, for your listeners, for me, moving into homelessness was my goal because in that short term, it was safer for me to do that. And in school, my goal every day was to make sure nobody knew what was going on because I did not want to get system involved. Um, and so it was just a really dark, hard time, a lot of despair. And so I was setting up in the bleachers of our gym. Usually I was down playing with my friends, and I was just up there, and I actually was um, thinking about the strategy and the plan and everything to escape the pain and suffering. So I'd come up with a date, I'd come up with a strategy.
Hmm.
And as I'm sitting there just thinking about that, because the day was at hand, and that teacher came up, and he didn't know what was going on, but he just sat with me for the longest time and sat real close. And I don't know, after about 3 or 4 minutes, he just leaned in really closely and said, Chan, you're going to be okay. And that night, as I was, I wrote about it in the book as I had the gun underneath my chin, just to be blunt.
Hmm.
His voice just kept coming to the forefront of my mind, and changed the decision. And obviously, he's one of the reasons I'm alive today. And as I learned more about positive psychology and things like gratitude, for instance, I don't know, it was probably about 7 years ago now. I actually went back to that hometown and found the teacher because I wanted to tell him thank you and I wanted to do it in person.
Hmm.
And so found him at the high school gym. He had long since retired, but he was still working and taking money so that people could go into the gym and watch the basketball game. So I sat up beside him and I don't know, probably about 30 minutes in, I scooted over and I leaned in real close to him like he did to me. And he's, of course, leaning away from me at this point. And I whispered to him, I said, you're the reason I'm alive, and told him the story. And his reaction was classic. And he just looked at me and he said, I did what? He didn't even remember the moment. And I'll be honest with you, I love that story because number one, that's who he was. That was his character. He just leaned into kids. And the second thing for me, in the personal nature of hope, is that my intention and my vision is that we start being much more intentional about giving hope when it's needed. So that's kind of the mission that I feel like I have both personally and professionally.
What would the world be like if everybody did more of the good things they're good at and enjoy, and if everybody was aware of this hope construct
Sure.
and
Yeah.
had the personal experience of someone along the way checking in with them,
Hmm.
making
Yeah.
sure.
So I think about first of all, the idea of flourishing comes to mind, and I think about flourishing not in the total absence of pain and suffering because that's just not the way life works, but that in that journey we find meaning and purpose. Um, and so, one of the things that I also think about in the work that I do with human service type organizations that serve those who are suffering. And over the years, we've adopted a system whereby, let's just imagine a family driving a car down the road, and that family's car tire has a blowout. Our systems have gotten pretty good in giving that family a donut to replace that tire, um, and that's good. But that family probably shouldn't drive more than 50 miles, nor should they drive more than 50 miles an hour because they're going to have a blowout again. And so I think when we begin to become more intentional about hope, um, you know, it's it's operating under the idea that hope is a basic human right, and that being intentional about teaching the skill of goal setting and pathways development needs to be much more intentional.
I'm sure you've reflected on the irony of this before, but that is the person who's at that point where they wind up with the gun under their chin, let's say, had to be very intentional about the goal and the pathways to get there.
Sure. Yeah, it's a hopeful act,
It's
perhaps, right?
a hope building,
Where mhm.
like a hope building
Well,
act. Like it's the irony is so.
but what's the goal, right? What's the goal? And the goal is to escape the pain. Um, and this is one of the things our research focuses on. So, for instance, one of the things we know is that when you and I are experiencing adversity, we tend to be much more likely to set goals that are avoidant in nature, right? We're much more likely to set goals around outcomes that we do not want to occur. But when we nurture hope, we see that transition towards an achievement mindset. And, I think about things like substance abuse and recovery and people going into treatment today in our communities because they don't want to lose their family, they don't want to go to jail, or they don't want to lose their job. And I have to tell you, I think those are the perfect reasons to go into treatment and recovery. But that's where we start, right?
It is. Yes. Yes. So we've got the International Day of Hope coming up on Saturday, July 12th. I am excited about that. We are doing something here in Nebraska. Anything percolating in Oklahoma or anything online perhaps around that time where we may be able to experience Chan live somewhere or
Yeah, that would be exciting. In Oklahoma, um, our governor and first lady, Governor Stitt and First Lady Sarah Stitt, have declared that Oklahoma is going to become a hope-centered state. Um, so they've been following this research around the science of hope and its tremendous power in predicting well-being for children, adults, and family. Um, so for us as a state, I think it's pretty intentional to start thinking about systems. What's a hope-centered school? What's a hope-centered human services, for instance? And First Lady Sarah Stitt and I co-founded what's called Hope Rising Oklahoma, where we travel around to communities in our state and we put on hope summits. And it's we do all the fundraising so that the event is free to all the residents, and we teach them the basic skills of goals, pathway, and agency.
that is beautiful. I had I think a hope building summer in Oklahoma one time. It was my introduction to I don't, yeah, it was an interfaith program. I had an internship with Catholic Charities in Oklahoma City.
Oh yeah, yeah.
We were looking at some civic initiatives, feasibility. So I was just kind of an information gatherer. And then what had happened was I just finished up a service learning internship in Kansas, where I'm from originally, and had become familiar with community leadership programs and just Googled community leadership Oklahoma City, found a person called and turned into this internship job in the summer and wound up getting to they had a civic I forget what the name of it was, but we had a gentleman who in the early 80s had been director of like the mental health association nationally, and when there was huge cuts to mental health institutions in the early 80s had I guess the formation of this organization independent sector came about, and it was kind of to tend to the well-being overall of the nonprofit sector. But he'd written a book. I think it was just called Civil Society. His name was Brian O'Connell. I'd heard about him during that service learning internship and got to meet him that summer, and it was just a wonderful summer. Like all these things. So I've had very very positive hope building things from Oklahoma. So whatever's going on there, it's been going on for a while because this was like back in the summer of 1999 in between Kansas and Texas, where
Yeah.
I stumbled into the founding year of the RGK Center for Philanthropy and Community Service, which was sort of a collaborative thing where I guess Lady Bird Johnson had wanted to see philanthropy as part of the public affairs overall, a piece of that. And so they had encouraged they recruited a retiring family foundation president to come help be the inaugural director, and I thought he is quite the instructor when on our day on volunteerism our guest speaker was Lady Bird Johnson,
Oh.
and she would say things such as you got to find something that makes your heart sing.
Hmm.
It seems
Hmm.
like she did with wildflowers and whatnot and much more. But it was a very hope building experience there at that time. And the director presented an essay on our first day, which was an essay on servant leadership by Robert Greenleaf. And it doesn't say hope directly in that essay, but it says that to me, I like generative community builder better than servant leader. Just as so,
Hmm.
I'll just say that other thing. Um, your real job is to create an environment of hope and make sure that everybody that's a part of your team has hope. To make sure that you spread that hope throughout the community, that everybody in your community, even extend it out beyond whatever your direct project is, that whatever you do as a team in your endeavor, public, private, nonprofit, civic, third space, whatever, that it's elevating the people that are least well off in your community, or at the very least, not making their lives worse. So it's this incredibly like embedded in community approach to community building.
Hmm. Hmm.
And this is way too long of me talking. So I will just stop and let's say, like, I appreciate the things that were presented in my life when I was there in Oklahoma City for a summer. And it was a beautiful thing. And I feel like I've stepped away from some of that, what the trajectory, like, I think there was a lot of life that had to happen, but I think
Sure.
it is just a joy to meet people such as yourself that
That's
are
very
in
kind.
this intentional hope building journey, community builders building community around hope and creating environments. And this is very exciting. Anyways, back to you, the guest. What would you like to see happen going forward with hope? Um,
Yeah. I'll tell you one thing that I'm really interested in, and we have a forthcoming publication research study coming out, and I started to, and I really took this from an article by Rick Snyder on hope as social commerce, and it's basically the idea that we exist in a social environment, um, and that there's a certain economy when we work together on shared goals. There's a certain efficiency and effectiveness when we work together. And so the publication that we have that'll be coming out hopefully in the next couple of months is on this new conceptualization, really extending Snyder's work, where we introduce the idea of collective hope. And it really is, this idea that we sometimes share goals, and that as an individual, the barriers may be overwhelming to me personally. But when I work together in a community, we have the capacity to, um, well, let me let me just be blunt. It's John F. Kennedy's "We choose to go to the moon" speech, right? That's collective hope, and bringing diverse people together um, towards a common goal. I'm very interested in seeing where that goes.
is that the ask not what you can do for your country, or ask not
It's
what your
not.
country can do for you?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah. No,
sorry.
it's he was at Rice University, and it's a beautiful little YouTube. We choose to go to the moon. And I think about that speech, and I think he united not only the political divide, the social divide, generated tremendous fundraising, all towards a goal that would not be achieved during his presidency had he lived. And I think about the aspiration of setting a collective goal. And I wonder about the power that that would have in a neighborhood, for instance, or um, in a state or in a school or, you know, in a system.
Are there any programs working with neighborhoods and hope building, like at the neighborhood association level?
Sure. We're in when the governor here in Oklahoma declared that we would become a hope centered state, we began working with over 35 state agencies where all of their leadership, we've trained about 30,000 state employees around this concept of hope. And we think about hope as a framework. And so we've actually published research showing not only positive outcomes on citizens, but also in terms of significant reductions in burnout, significant reductions in secondary traumatic stress, improvements in retention in the workforce. Um, and it's really through that lens of using hope because you need to be well to do well, and that's kind of the framework we take.
That you filled me with hope. Like I thought I was already pretty hopeful, but thank you so much for being a guest on the show. It
Thank you.
appears that we can find out more about the work of Chan Hellman at chanhellman.com. That's CHANHELLMAN.com. And is there anything else you would like to share before we say goodbye?
No, I think to me this work of being intentional about hope. I think about the other strengths, the VIA character strengths, for instance, and I think how intentional we are in teaching our children teamwork. We're so intentional teaching our children about fairness and gratitude and teamwork. All of those strengths, and yet I wonder why we're not quite so intentional in teaching hope. And I guess for me, that's my own personal mission. Is I would like to see us use hope as a very intentional framework um, in the way that we interact with each other.
If I can be a part of that team, I will look forward to that more than more than I can put into words.